person worthy of praise, and that is Salahuddin al-Nasir, the victorious Salahuddin. Bashir, why you got to bring Islam or Hadith into this? This is business. He was treacherous and he overthrew the caliph to which he belonged.
Becoming better people and more, spiritually upright.
Yeah.
That doesn't happen if you don't acknowledge you make a mistake. Welcome back, everybody. Welcome to the Sands of Time podcast. I am Tariq Ibrahim, and I am with the most incredibly amazing individual here, Mujibuddin.
Peace be upon you, Assalamu alaikum, and everybody. So the next person, another great hero of mine, and somebody that is uniquely remembered globally as a person worthy of praise, and that is Salahuddin al-Nasir, the victorious Salahuddin, who was reportedly both one of the most tactical and strategic geniuses of his time, but also ardently, staunchly, extremely religious and pious. So he's one of those guys that I think of when I'm in a boardroom or if I'm striking a deal with somebody and somebody on the other side goes, Bashir, why you got to bring Islam or Hadith into this? This is business. I'm like, Salahuddin would slap you in the face for saying that.
Oh, wow.
Right? Salahuddin, everything went through the Islamic filter, right? So how can I contextualize the greatness that is Salahuddin? So Salahuddin is a lot like my superhero hero, Batman, in that he's a unintended superhero. He didn't plan to be Batman or Salahuddin. He was thrust into it unwillingly by circumstance and history. In the case of Salahuddin, he was pulled kicking and screaming by one of his Ammu Shirko. Salahuddin is a Kurd in Syria. So in this day and age, Kurds are very oppressed and they're unfortunately discriminated against by a lot of people in the Muslim world. But in those days, maybe he was not from the same tribe as the majoritarian people, but the fact that he was allowed to rise and become nobility and royalty the way he did tells you something about that society and how they were more inclusive than maybe we are today in the Muslim community. He was born around 1130. For the first 20, 30 years of his life, he was a standard prince. His father was nobility. His name was al-Ayyubi, right?
Mm-hmm.
So he was Yusuf ibn Ayyub. So he decided to name the dynasty that he later founded after his father. So his father served very faithfully under the administration of an empire that was from Asia Minor, Afghani area, Khorasan, called the Zengi family. And I believe they also had ties to Africa because the name Zanj comes from South Africa, but their power base was generally from northern Syria and the Khorasan area. So Salahuddin initially wanted nothing to do, based on reports that I think are more believable, he wanted nothing to do with leadership. Like, he was not interested in being a sultan. He was not interested in military dictatorships or leadership. So when his uncle, who was a great general under the Zengids, wants to conquer Egypt or stabilize Egypt, because Egypt at the time was ruled by the Ismaili Shia Fatimids. And so I think Shias might have a more nuanced view on the Ayyubid dynasty than maybe Orthodox Sunni Muslims would. But again, I've never heard anything where he's entirely thrown out with the bathwater. But there is this tension in history with what Salahuddin did. So Salahuddin at one point gets dragged kicking and screaming by Shirkuh. He's like, no, you're going to come with me. We're going to put out a few rebellions and conquer some land in Egypt, which is really the crown jewel of the Islamic world. It's always been, even pre-Risala, whether it's the Pharaoh, whether it's under the Prophet Joseph alayhi salam, it's always been the crown jewel of any empire, right? Whether it's under Cyrus the Great, you always, Darius, Alexander, you always want Egypt. And I think your family is actually Egyptian, so I'm sure
We always want Egypt.
you always want Egypt.
And we're happy to hear that people want us as well. It doesn't hurt. It
Exactly.
doesn't hurt the ego.
No, absolutely. So Egypt is one of the great crown jewels in Islamic history. And even to this day, it has tremendous potential. It's probably being undervalued by, I don't want to get too political, but let's just say mismanagement of the current C-suite executives that are in power at that corporation, or so to speak.
Sure.
But I digress. Let's get back to the great Saladin, the noble Salahuddin. Salahuddin cuts his teeth being forced to be a governor and serve in high office under his uncle. So over time, he rises up the ranks because he's so capable, but he's also a man of high integrity, where he ends up becoming the Grand Vizier of the Fatimids in Egypt. But the reports that you'll see is he was more seen as a vassal, and the Fatimids at the time were very weak. So they actually needed Salahuddin and his rising popularity to help them stabilize their rule because they were doing very well by this is now the mid 12th century, 1160, 1170. They're not doing so well. And Saladin is just that perfect Syrian, Kurdish, Arab king that they need to stabilize things. And he's practicing Muslim. And there's a bit of a revival in the Ummah at the time because in 1099, we have gotten our tails whipped by the Crusaders and every last person in the sacred city of Jerusalem, Muslims, Jews, Christian, Orthodox, were just massacred. And no Muslim has been in the Holy Land of Jerusalem since 1099 when Godfrey did all those things. So there's a bit of a revival where people are starting to think that, hey, maybe we got whooped because we went away from Islam and what made us great. So there's a bit of a revival that Salahuddin is not only helping shape, but he's also on the crest of. Mm-hmm. So there is that the legitimacy that he brings as a co-aligner and a consensus builder within the community at large. So over time, we won't get into the details, but he does end up becoming the Sultan and sort of overthrowing the Fatimids. There's various different ways that it happens. Some people, if you're a pro-Fatimid, you're going to say he was treacherous and he overthrew the caliph to which he belonged. My take is, without negating that as a legitimate viewpoint, the way I see it is Salahuddin was a vassal lord who was being used by the Fatimids to prop up their rule. So at some point, you're making a calculated decision to prop somebody up that when you can no longer control them, you're liable for what happens.
Absolutely.
And I want to contrast this to Salahuddin's loyalty to the Zengid family. So his father, Ayyub, was very loyal to Nuruddin Zengi, who was the king of the Zengids, ruling from northern Syria, Halab, Aleppo, and the northern part of the Ummah, the nation, the empire, if you will. Salahuddin, there's many, many instances where he was clearly, based on the history books, more powerful than his Zengid overlord, Nuruddin, but he always faithfully obeyed him because he was like, this is the man to whom my father and me have given allegiance. I will never be treacherous to him. He didn't have the same relationship with the Fatimids. He didn't see it as treachery. He's like, it's a political armistice. It's a relationship of convenience that we have. I'm stabilizing your rule, but you're not my guy. I'm not your guy. That's really how I read that. It's
mutual benefit.
But it's real politics. So he's biding his time. He's coming up the ranks. He's consolidating his power in Egypt. And this is one of the underrated things about Salahuddin. How many people, I always think of, some of the guys that I love to admire, like Tom Brady, for example. Brady was drafted 199th overall. Like, he was almost not even drafted.
Yeah, that's true.
And he was overlooked. And if you told him the day after he got drafted, you're going to win 7 Super Bowls and you're going to be remembered throughout all history as this legend, you'd be like, bro, I was drafted 199th. Like, let's just focus on me making the team, right? But over time, every successive victory and accomplishment only expands your horizons to what you can accomplish further. And so you've got this person that came from very humble, modest origins with no ambition even. And now they're starting to think, dude, maybe I can just be the greatest of all time.
Yeah.
And that is in many ways with Salahuddin. He's like, Shirko, I don't even want to come with you to Egypt. Why are you taking me? Right? And Shirko's like, Yalla ya ibni, you're going to come with me. I'm going to drag you kicking and screaming. I see your potential. And again, this is why we have to honor our ammus and our parents and our elders, because sometimes they see in us what we don't see in ourselves. So God bless Shirko. We're all better off for that man.
That's amazing.
Slapping Saladin upside the head and forcing him to do it. Telling him to go get it done, right? So he's very faithful to the Zengids. And there's a couple of times where, for example, he is about to conquer a city and he's besieging, for example, Kirak or some very strategic area that is of great importance to the Ummah in terms of us trying to get back Jerusalem, get back the sacred land. And Nuruddin goes, let me come test his loyalty. I'm going to come visit. And so when Salahuddin finds out that the king, Nuruddin, is coming, he actually just turns around, packs it up, and goes home back to Egypt. Because he knows Nuruddin isn't going to come and confront him over there. So because he doesn't want to be face to face where Nuruddin goes, okay, let's throw down the gauntlet. Are you loyal to me or not? Like, he doesn't want to get into those uncomfortable discussions. And he also doesn't want to sit there and have Nuruddin read his face and say that this guy has greater ambitions, right? Then maybe he'll overthrow my descendants, even if he won't overthrow me. And that's exactly what happens. Because when Nuruddin dies in the early, I believe it's 1171, 1172, and this is actually very fortuitous for Salahuddin because he's getting very powerful. And Nuruddin, for all his greatness and how fondly he's remembered in history, he's very suspicious of Salahuddin. But this man has become a monster. This man is like the prince of the Ummah. Everybody loves him. He's a great general, great strategist. He's brilliant. And he's a freaking unbelievably practicing Muslim. He's like, and so does Nuruddin. So he's like, I don't know what to do with this guy. I can't
punish him. I can't do anything.
And he's never showed disloyalty to me outwardly. So like, what am I going to do? So when Nuruddin dies, Salahuddin, that opens the door for him because he was loyal to the dad. But in Islam, we're not loyal to entire dynasties. So for example, what started the fitna, if we're going to go back to Amir Muawiyah and Ahl al-Bayt, when Amir Muawiyah died, the reason that Karbala happened is Amir Muawiyah said, before you do anything, you need to get a renewed bay'ah, which means allegiance from the Ahl al-Bayt. Otherwise, your legitimacy to rule is zilch. So Yazid tries to get Imam Hussein, who was the surviving patriarch of the Ahl al-Bayt, because Imam Hassan has been killed under very suspicious circumstances. He was likely poisoned, according to my reading of history. But wallahu alam, God knows best. Imam Hussein is basically like, over my dead body, am I going to sign an allegiance to you? Amir Muawiyah, my brother, put up with because he struck a deal. The idea that in Islam, we're not loyal to dynasties. If I'm loyal to you, you're my guy. But we're not perpetually loyal to dynasties that are not being held accountable by themselves and their people. So that's what happens to Salahuddin. He's like, Nuruddin, that was my guy, but his son, Ismail Zengi, is an 11-year-old kid who has no formal training. He's not my Sultan. But this is the most Salahuddin thing ever. He's in Egypt, and there's a lot of amirs, a lot of, we'll call them feudal lords in Damascus who are angling and chopping at the bit to supplant that young prince of the Zengis, being like, oh, this kid is kind of weak, and there's a regent ruling in that region. It's a bit of a puppet. Why don't we kill this kid, or why don't we just take over? And like, hey, how do you want to divvy up this sow, or so to speak?
There's always treachery, eh? There's always
people are Sahabis. These are not Sahabis. These are just kings and politicians and sharks.
Yeah, but it always exists, right? People always forget, and this is the whole point of the podcast, to bring the human level to it, right? There's always people waiting to take advantage of an opportunity. There are people on the sidelines just waiting to eat you alive. And most people, when they're looking at their own life, not to say that you should be looking for these characters, but you have to be aware of life. And that's why this is what you're doing.
It happens Salahuddin swim with those sharks without growing some sharp elbows or so to speak of his own.
Absolutely.
That's literally what we're going at. That's an excellent point.
Yeah.
Sorry to jump in. But I couldn't agree more. That's exactly what I'm getting at.
You have to know that. You have to know that there's sharks. You have to know that there's ducks. You have to know that there's lions. And you're in a jungle. You're in a jungle, and if you can't navigate it, either the duck will fly in and take your lunch, or the lion will eat you and your lunch. So you gotta, as you said, grow some wings of your own.
Exactly. So Salahuddin crafts this master maneuver where he says, look, I'm going to liberate this kid from what he's likely undergoing now to the emirs of Damascus. I'm going to come in and take over Damascus, and I'm going to free the kid. But what he does is he comes in, and no one's going to mess with Salahuddin. So ultimately, he's appointed the emir of Damascus. So Damascus becomes another tool in the toolkit for Salahuddin. But in the most Salahuddin thing ever, he obviously doesn't give the sultanate back to Ismail, but he treats the kid with the utmost respect. And over time, he returns him to his family in peace in Halab. His family is in Aleppo. Again, if you're looking at this from a purely Machiavellian, medieval, tactical perspective, he should have killed that kid.
Yeah, sure.
Because that kid's going to go when he has a legitimacy, when he gets old enough to be the sultan.
I'm supposed to be the sultan.
And so the rational thing to do would be
chop his head off.
But Salahuddin is like, that is not what Muslims do. We are not those people. So if I have to pay the price and this kid comes back and busts me in the face and I end up losing, I'm okay with that, because there's always a price to be paid for doing the right thing.
So what did he do? He just took him with him?
He just gave him back to his family.
He gave him to his family.
He treated him like royalty. And when the kid got older, he goes, why don't you go back to your family in Halab? And I'm sure they had some uncomfortable discussions where Ismail is like, I'm also a Mike, can I be the king again? And Saladin was like, yeah, about that. Let's talk about it tomorrow. It didn't happen. The bottom line is it didn't happen. He sent him back to his family, treated him very well by all accounts and all reports. And he just slowly grew his sphere of influence that way. So he's getting his hands dirty, but he's washing them as soon as he can. And he's doing it the most noble and with integrity way imaginable. So that's my point that I want to make about Salahuddin. This is not some Mother Teresa that was just anointed and didn't have to sully his hands with getting involved in real politics his entire life. He literally had to swim with the shark, make it to shore, and find a way to stay true to his values and his integrity. And that is the most difficult thing. And I think that's why God has always really rewarded that man with his legacy. And I want to share something. One of my favorite things about Salahuddin is really how it all ended. And I'm trying to think whether we should go to the end yet or I should kind of keep going sequentially. Maybe I should keep going sequentially.
Yeah.
So Salahuddin, sorry, I digress. So Salahuddin then, after he becomes the Sultan, he slowly starts marshaling and he takes over other Zengid territories, for example, Aleppo, then becomes a bastion for the Ayyubi dynasty. And even to this day, there's what we call Salahuddin, the citadel of Saladin, which is now in Aleppo. It's amazing. You could go there. Saladin had some of the greatest castles. There's one in Karak, which was actually a Crusader castle, so I'll give that to the Crusaders. But then his cousin, Izzuddin Osama, built an amazing one at Ajalun in what is now Jordan. And they're just amazing castles that they would build at the top of the hill so he could see everything, see the people coming. Literally from the Ajalun castle, you can see into Lebanon, you can see into Jerusalem, you can see into Syria, you can see into everywhere. You can see into even Iraq on the other side. They were so smart about how they chose. And it was the strategic genius that Salahuddin just had. He had this amazing vision for how he was going to do things. And he wasn't necessarily the greatest general. People don't realize if you were to line up a pantheon of our greatest generals in Islamic history, he might be near the bottom of the list or an honorable mention. He lost many campaigns, and when he was stacked up against armies that were his size or bigger, I mean, he wasn't always the most successful. If you look at Khalid ibn Walid, if you look at Sa'ad bin Abi Waqqas, the uncle of the Prophet, Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam, you look at so many other generals, Mehmed the Great, these men were almost undefeated, and they were unstoppable, right? Salahuddin lost many battles, but I'm going to get into that in a second because that's also the product of him doing the right thing, which is the tactically wrong or irrational thing to do. And I'm going to get into that in a second. So Salahuddin ends up growing in power, and along the way, he starts, not surprisingly, because of who he is and what he's being touted to do within the community, within the Ummah, he starts brushing up against the Crusaders. You've got King Baldwin, the leper king of Jerusalem, who was by all accounts a decent man. I mean, some people say he was more pragmatic, but I think by and large, he did try and strike some measure of peace while defending his people from the barbarian horde that was our people, right? So Baldwin, he's a leper, so as time goes on, he's getting less and less effective and his health is really getting in the way. But in 1177, people don't realize Baldwin decimates in a surprise attack Salahuddin at Mongizard. And Salahuddin escapes not only barely with his life, he almost gets killed. Only 10% of his army makes it back to Damascus.
Oh, wow.
So they really are. So it is a decimation. He's caught off guard. He loses his entire grand army. It is extremely, extremely embarrassing to the point of being a blow to your legitimacy to rule. Like, bro, you got jacked by the Crusaders who you were supposed to be supplanting. You lost 90% of your army down the river. Like, who are you even? Like, why are we still talking to you? It was horrible.
Wow.
So within 3 years, Salahuddin is trying to rebuild his army, but just like the Treaty of Hudaybiyah, he's being smart about it. He's saying, listen, bro, I just lost 90% of my army. There's no way I'm going to go walk in the front door and bust these guys in the face. Why don't I strike a truce with the very Crusaders that we all know are in my crosshairs? And so in 1180, when he strikes this truce with Baldwin, there is a general famine in Syria that is also impacting Jerusalem and historic Palestine. And so nobody wants to be at wars. People are tired. He strikes a 2-year truce that expires on its terms, and then they go back to fighting because everybody's gotten the reprieve that they wanted. And then again, in 1185, there's another truce that he strikes. 1185. 1187 is when he took Jerusalem and reconquered it. So 2 years before the reconquest of Jerusalem, he's signing a peace treaty that many people would, in his time, say that's an unholy alliance with your very enemy, right? To ultimately call off what you're looking to accomplish, which is take their crown jewel.
Right.
So he's striking all these unholy alliances. So you fast forward to today, oh, he is an agent of so and so. Oh, he is an agent of that. Or this person is not a true sovereign. Nobody is a true sovereign. We're all, if you're elected to office and you're the Prime Minister of Canada or the President of the U.S., you are serving powerful constituencies, right? Why is it different when a Muslim ruler makes a realpolitik decision and decides to sign an unholy alliance? You judge the pizza by its taste, not by the ingredients.
Yeah, right.
Right? Like, let's see you struck an unholy alliance on that with Israel. That people weren't happy about that, and he was ultimately assassinated for that. But that ushered in, I mean, I'm not an aficionado of modern Egyptian history, but I've heard from a lot of my Egyptian friends that ultimately did yield a lot of good benefit for Egypt.
Yeah.
Right? So you got,
according to my dad, it yielded a lot of good benefit for Egypt.
Right? As well. Exactly. So that's my point, is you can't judge immediately. You need the perspective of the elapse of time to truly assess something, right? To really look at
that's super,
and that's very important. I can't judge something and like, that's a bad idea. Like every great exercise in entrepreneurship, Facebook, Meta, Instagram, Google, Microsoft seemed like idiotic ideas at the time. The only way you know they're genius ideas is with the perspective of history and hindsight. You look back and you go, thank God he didn't take our advice at that time.
Yeah, that's right.
Right?
Thank God he wrote with that thing.
A part of being a leader and an entrepreneur is convincing people to do things, bucking the probability, getting people to do things that they, in the absence of you, would not do. So you're going to have, by definition, things that you present that look like stupid ideas when you first present them. So that's Salahuddin bringing the motherload of stupid ideas. I'm going to conquer Jerusalem.
I never.
How are you going to do that? I'm going to strike a truce with the Crusaders twice, including 2 years before I take it, right?
Amazing.
So imagine how he had to sell that to his people. And they show that in Kingdom of Heaven, which is not the most historically accurate, but there are certain things that they anthropomorphize very well. For example, when there's an unnamed general who goes to him, he's like, why did you withdraw, Salahuddin? Right? Now, obviously, I'm butchering his accent.
That's okay.
Right? He goes, why did you just withdraw? And he has this whole banter with him saying, you have to be smart. You don't just go busting in the front door if you don't have the arguments to do so.
That's right.
And so he was a strategic genius. What he gave up to other legendary generals in history in terms of pure battlefield tactical genius, he gained back with foresight and vision. So he's a strategic genius. So that's why he was able to spread, and you could argue he was able to create this huge empire despite so many setbacks like Magazar. Like there's no way he should have recovered. That was just devastating.
Wow.
Right? It was really bad. And that emboldened the Crusaders like there is no tomorrow. They're like, our leopard teenage king just whooped them.
Yeah.
And they lost all their army. Like, let's go attack them. And Baldwin arguably was so much more aggressive and cocky because of that victory. He's like, Saladin, he's like, I roughed that man up down the river. Right? Like it was a problem. It was a problem.
Oh, wow. That's amazing.
Fast forward to 1187. Every khutbah will tell you, Salahuddin walked into Quds and nobody opposed him. It was a myth. Bro, nobody talks about Mongazar. Nobody talks about how he handled his situation in the transition with grace and loyalty. No one talks about all these uncomfortable things. No one talks about how he didn't even want to be the freaking Sultan. His Ammu, God bless him, like dragged him into it, right? Without understanding those antecedent elements, how do you truly understand Salahuddin? And when you don't understand them, you're like, yeah, that was Salahuddin. This is just Mujir and Tariq. And what are we supposed to do in this dirty world that we live in? Bro, he lived in the dirtiest of worlds too. He was navigating the sharpest of the sharks and the most aggressive of tigers and lions in his midst. And he did it by sometimes having to get down on their level, but he got back to his values. And I'm going to go on a theological diatribe here that I think is very near and dear to my heart. And I know it's not exactly historical, but if you look at Surah As-Sad, which is a chapter of the Quran, so in many ways, a lot of ulama say that this chapter of the Quran is the Quranic response to the Old Testament and the Tanakh, giving a very real perspective of King David, King Solomon, and a lot of people that in Islamic tradition are not only kings, but they are the holiest of the holy. So we're in Islamic tradition not even allowed to speak ill of these people. So when you see passages in other scriptures that are painting them in a very difficult light, it's almost sacrilegious for Muslims where they can't comprehend. Right? That just to sort of contextualize that.
A little definition there.
Yeah, exactly. So Surah As-Sad hints at instances where Nabi Dawood, where King David alayhi salam, peace be upon him, and King Solomon, Nabi Sulaiman alayhi salam, and so many prophets made mistakes. But what God loves about them is they are what he calls awwabin. in other words, to use modern speak, they always minimize the time from stimulus or mistake to response. So before God even had to point out to them that, hey, David, you made a mistake there, or Solomon, you're not up to my standards as my holy prophet, they immediately, Joseph, alayhi salam, similar example where when he was in prison, he famously asked one of his prison mates to ask the Pharaoh or the king, to free him. And then immediately he was like, I should be asking my king, God, to free me. And then God says, I accept your apology, but فَلَبِثَ فِي السِّجْنِ بِضْعَ سِنِينَ, but I'm going to make you languish in prison for a few more years, which bid'ah in Arabic usually is associated with 9. So he probably stayed in prison 9 years for a minor slip up. That's the standard that prophets are held up to in Islam. So God is telling you, these prophets that I hold so highly and I love them so much, I don't want you guys talking smack about them. I'm here to tell you that they made mistakes, but it's not the absence or the perfection about them that I love. It's that I made them imperfect as humans, and they didn't get into my major transgressions, because in Islamic orthodoxy, in our Aqidah, we believe that prophets, once they are ordained to be prophets, are then ma'suman of them. God then protects them from going down an avenue that would lead into sin, but they make mistakes, and they are punished for their mistakes. Like Joseph making that, it's not a sin, but he's like asking the wrong person to free him. That to God is a sin for a prophet, right? Absolutely. But it's not a sin in the conventional sense. So God is saying in Surah As-Sad, what I love about my beloved prophets is not that they were infallible and that they didn't make mistakes or that they didn't do things that humans do, like go to the bathroom and eat and bleed and sweat and get tired and anxious. It's that when they did anything negative, they bounced back to me before I even had to think to say anything. That's the beauty. So it creates the model for piety for an average human. You don't need to be perfect. You don't need to be perfect. I'm not asking you to be mistake-free. I'm asking you to minimize the response time from stimulus, i.e. a mistake or sin, to repentance. Close that gap, because that's what my prophets did best, and that's why I anointed them to be prophets. But I want that to be the blueprint for you guys, right? Oh. So he's kind of echoing the motifs of the Old Testament, not going as far as to say they did any dhunub, any sins, but he's saying, acknowledging, yeah, they did make mistakes, but that's what I loved about them, is they came right back to me. So that's what I wanted to tie back to our discussion today, is Salahuddin is not a perfect person, right? But when he does something that he's not comfortable with, he's trying to rectify it as quickly as he can. Yeah. So he does that with this kid, with Ismail. He knows that he has to overthrow him, but he's going to do it in the most Salahuddin Islamic way possible. Later on, there's a moment where outside the city walls of Jerusalem in October of 1187, when he believes that he's been betrayed by Lord Balian's forces or somebody in his control, and there's a surprise attack where he thought there was an armistice and some of his people are killed, he is irate. So he swears, he actually makes a sacred oath on God. He goes, Wallahu al-Azim, when I take the city, I will do what Godfrey did to my people. And so when the Crusaders hear that, they are obviously not very happy to hear that. And almost instantly, Salahuddin realizes that he shouldn't have made that mistake. So in Islamic tradition, in Islamic theology, when you make a sacred oath to God, you absolutely need to carry it out. And if you don't, there's a very hefty punishment. You've got to fast a number of days, and it's just not a thing that you want to take lightly. And there's no guarantee that God will forgive you for breaking an oath, especially one where you invoke his name, right? So that's a bit of context. So the moment he says that, he's like, oh, geez, what did I do? So he goes to the ulama, the scholars in his midst, because he always has a brain trust of scholars and theologians who can keep him grounded. And again, this is a great lesson for all of us. We should always have a brain trust, advisory board, circle of sages.
Even before you go into that brain trust, I think just having that, scenario where because you were mentioning that the prophets from before would always go back and repent, and they were known because they would repent quickly. I think a lot of times people these days, that even though they know they made a mistake, they just shrug it off like, I'm human. No big deal. Like, I'm supposed to be perfect. And it's like, no, you're not supposed to be perfect, but at least acknowledge it and say you'll do better next time. Because I think that the whole idea of human beings evolving and becoming better people and more, spiritually upright, that doesn't happen if you don't acknowledge you make a mistake.
Exactly. And I think that's what Surah Al-Sad is trying to get at. At least acknowledge it first, and then we'll take it from there. Mm-hmm. So immediately Saladin goes to his brain trust in the scholarly circle of advice, and he goes, to me, this is haram for me this is actually forbidden in Islam for me to do what I swore to God to do. What do I do? And unanimously, every scholar said, don't even sweat it, Salahuddin. A wallahi that is made on a subject or a basis of something that is forbidden is not even enforceable. God doesn't want you to carry out that. So he got out from under that and under that wallahi. And he was asked by Lord Balian, I heard that you made an oath, and in fact, to kill every last one of us. Why are you offering me such good terms? Because when the ultimate negotiations come to, he offers Balian a very, very lenient set of terms. He says, free passage for everyone back to Christian lands. You guys can stay as long as you want. The politicians have to leave, things like that, and no harm, no foul. And all Muslims, Jews, and Christians, we're going to resettle Jews because Jews had been exiled at the time. So Saladin, after Omar the First had resettled Jews in 638, Saladin does the same thing in 1187, and Balian doesn't understand. He goes, why would you do that when Godfrey killed every last one of you inside the city limits? And I even heard that you made an oath, and so he had to sort of allay those fears. But he says, no, we are not those people. What Godfrey did is against our religion. So I'm never going to do something against my religion. So again, it goes back to that same point where everything went through his filter of integrity. So for those who aren't Muslim, I'm not trying to sit here and be like, listen, to really get value from the story, you got to convert to Islam. What I'm saying is, whatever your sacred values are, understand those. For Saladin, for me, and for it's our theology, it's our religion. Everything's going to go through that lens of morality, but never compromise your core values, right? And that's what you can take from Saladin is everything went through that moral lens. And honestly, he took it to the extreme because obviously Balian was like, bro, I ain't trying to fight here with no army with you forever. Like, if you're letting me stay here, safe passage, it's all good. Where do I sign? So October 2nd, 1187, Jerusalem is turned back to the Muslims. Muslims go in, and it is said that the Haram al-Sharif, the entire Temple Mount complex, is washed with rosewater and musk to purify it. And it was a pretty emotional sight when they re-entered. So Salahuddin, for all the turmoil and things that he's been through, I'm sure that's something that he'll never forget, right? And history has always remembered him almost singularly for that one accomplishment, returning the Muslims to Jerusalem. But not just the Muslims, but there's Orthodox Christians that were being persecuted. There was other Jews, and everybody was able to return to Jerusalem, which is the holy city for all of us. It's the sacred, the holiest of the holy. We all love it, as a lot of Ashkenazi cousins of ours will say, next year in Jerusalem. It's something that means something to all of us, that holy city. So Salahuddin is able to restore it to that glory that it deserves. However, a lot of his generals feel that after he takes Jerusalem, or when he's dealing with Crusaders, that he should execute every one of the senior generals, because if you don't do that, they're going to go take up arms against you later on
and rebel.
And they're going to come back and rebel, and there's going to be a subsequent crusade, and you're going to go back to 1099. So Salahuddin says, okay, I hear what you guys are saying, and I respect it because we're a team, and I always value your advice, but I want to ask a favor. And they go, sure, shoot. He goes, if I'm able to buy the freedom of the person that I don't want to execute with my own money, we're going to free him. And they go, okay, no problem. So he ends up with his own money, freeing all the people that his generals wanted to execute for tactical reasons. And those generals, of course, just on cue, go and join the next crusade of Richard the Lionheart, the King of England, who comes back, and he successively defeats Salahuddin maybe, I would say, 3 times at the Battle of Acre. So many times Salahuddin actually loses, and he has an uneasy truce that he signs with the Crusaders. Ultimately, Jerusalem stays within Muslim control, but Salahuddin's reputation as a general, as a ruler, as a protector of Muslim lands takes a massive hit because he's successively getting beaten by Richard the Lionheart, who is, by definition and by name, in English tradition, revered and lionized as a great general. And he's King Richard, the famous King Richard. Famous King Richard.
Oh, really?
And he stays true to his form, and he's a very tough out for Salahuddin on many occasions. And so if you're in Salahuddin's camp and you're one of those generals in 1192 or 1193 or 11 whatever, are you not looking at him and saying, bro, I told you not to let these clowns go?
Yeah,
right? I told you so. I told you so.
Absolutely.
But Salahuddin's response is, that's against my values. They didn't commit a crime. Therefore, I will not execute somebody. It is haram to execute somebody who doesn't deserve. He did execute some people, like Renaud de Chatillon, a very high-ranking crusader, many times broke the armistices that he had with King Baldwin. Salahuddin did. And in fact, according to classic historians, at one point, Renaud attack a Muslim caravan of people going for Hajj and kidnapped a woman who was known to be from the Haram of Salahuddin. So that usually means either a wife or more likely a sister or a sister-in-law, right? Somebody that, as assaulted, you're supposed to protect. So Reynaud de Chatillon embarrasses this woman. Some reports say that he killed her or he tortured her, but it was not a good look.
Wow.
So Salahuddin says, okay, if I ever meet this guy, he's done. So after the Battle of Hittin, that man is executed. So I'm not saying he's a pacifist. He definitely killed certain people. But the other people that were in his mind of a level that necessitated some sort of execution, they hadn't broke treaties, they haven't resorted to treachery, he thought that it was correct to free them. That was interesting. That was his value system.
Yeah.
Those same people came back and defeated him in battle, just like his general said they would. But the Salahuddin, he was paying the price to do the right thing according to his moral compass. And if you look at it from a panoptic historical perspective, 1,000 years later, does anybody even know that Salahuddin lost those battles to the Crusaders after he took back Jerusalem?
No.
People just remember him as the liberator. Most people think he was undefeated. He lost many times, right?
Yeah. I think that's what you're telling everyone today, that he lost
many battles, right? But that was God, from a theological, spiritual perspective, that was God testing Salahuddin. Like, okay, you're going to do the right thing and save these people and spare them. They are going to come back in a worldly sense and defeat you. Are you willing to pay that price? And are you going to take that test, that tribulation, with grace and continue coming back to me and thanking me, being thankful? Like Nuh, Prophet Noah, is recorded in the Quran and Islamic tradition as living for 900 years and having 8-9 followers. Like, he has a very low batting average by modern sports speak. But the way God remembers him in Isra, which is one of the great chapters in the Quran that deals with the Israelites and Masjid al-Aqsa and the Temple Mount, God says, "Innahu kana abdan shukura." He characterizes Noah as being one of the servants that was always thankful. So are you always thankful no matter what God gives you when he tests you with something? There's a verse in the Quran that says, وَلَنَبْلُوَنَّكُمْ بِشَيْءٍ مِّنَ الْخَوْفِ وَالْجُوعِ وَنَقْمٍ مِّنَ الْأَمْوَالِ. So in Arabic, in Arabic grammar, when God or when anybody puts a lam before something and a noon after it, it adds a level of certainty. Like, you can take it to the bank, God is saying, that I will test you بِنَقْصٍ مِّنَ الْأَمْوَالِ وَالْأَنفُسِ وَالثَّمَرَاتِ, with loss of money and wealth and loss of loved ones and people. I will test you with all you have. How are you going to respond? Right? As a guarantee that God has given us in the Quran. Salahuddin, you did the right thing. I guarantee you I'm going to test you on this. It's not just as we think, oh, I did the right thing when things aren't going my way. There's a worldly price to pay for doing the right thing. How many martyrs and heroes in history were executed for making a stand, but the reward is either eternal in the hereafter or they spark a revolution 100 years later. In their lifetime, they didn't actually reap the rewards of their justice and their righteousness. We're a community and a generation of instant gratitude. That's not how the world works. That's not the real story of Salahuddin.
And that's not even how fantasy world works. Like, even if you look at Batman or Superman or any hero, half the time Batman is a bad guy according to the Gotham police.
Exactly.
So even in the pretend world, when you do a good job, no one's going to acknowledge it, let alone think you did a good job.
Exactly.
And it's like the rule of humanity.
Exactly. So that is the lesson that I always take from Saladin. There's so many different amazing ways to unpack and slice up his history. But the way I remember it is, look how he got his hands dirty with grace and always was an awab. He always went back to his values, the way the holy prophets of God did. Look at the way that he treated his enemies. And there's so many stories that I can get into. And we were thinking to maybe even have a whole episode dedicated to him where we can unpack this. But maybe this is that episode that we talk about him. There's so many instances where his enemies, for example, I'm going to report one of my favorite stories. There was a skirmish that happened among the Crusaders and the Muslims, the Ayyubis. And a Christian girl was snapped up by, I believe, the Crusaders and sold into the market in slavery. And so the mother, who was not any person of note, goes to Richard the Lionheart and she says, my daughter was kidnapped last night and I think she's been sold into slavery. Can you get her back for me? Richard the Lionheart, who was the king of Christendom, goes, go talk to Saladin. He'll sort you out. Oh, look at the level of respect. So this Christian lady crosses over battle lines. She goes, and the soldiers were like, why are you here? Well, my king told me that I could find justice in your king. I'm like, okay, yeah. Well, he is known for that. So let's let you in. You go talk to Saladin. goes in and Salahuddin, he's like, how can I help? And she explains the story to him. He goes, no problem. Takes money out of his pocket, not even out of the treasury, like his Ayyubid pocket, gives it to his servant. He goes, go to the market right now, find this girl, pay whatever premium you have to bring her back to her mom.
Wow.
This guy goes into the market. It's not easy. She might have been sold a couple of times down the river. Finally, she comes back into Saladin's court. The woman starts crying when she sees her daughter. Saladin starts crying. He's like, Alhamdulillah, I was able to do something good today, right?
Wow.
Like, that's the level of piety. Like, I'm not trying to over-lionize people because I hope people realize, I just told you the dark side of Saladin too, right?
Mm-hmm.
He had to get his hands dirty. He had to elbow people that were in power, but look at the integrity that he always came back to, right? And this is something that Dr. Roy Casagrande, secular non-Muslim sources will tell you. This is not me making it up on behalf of one of my heroes, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like, that's the man that he was, Salahuddin. He always went back to his values. He doesn't care if you're coming from the enemy. He doesn't care if you're somebody that he should be killing because it'll be more convenient for my life's mission. He's going to do the thing that he thinks is right. And if he thinks he's uncomfortable with something, he's going to try and fix it or do the next best thing, like deliver a prince back to his family, treating him very well along the way, even though that prince could come back and blow up in his face like the Crusader generals actually did later on, right?
Amazing.
So that's Saladin in a nutshell. There's so many things that you can learn from him. And I think that's part of retaking history. Stop allowing it to be history, that is, to be taken not only by naysayers and people that want to write it in an unfavorable light, but from people that are overly rosy and overly glossing over the real political things that your heroes had to do. And we're going to have to maybe break here and do another episode on one of my other favorites, Mehmet the Great.
Sure.
There's a whole episode to unpack there, and
I think there's a lot of
there's a lot of stuff.
I hope you guys are enjoying this. You know, I'm learning so much as we're going. So this is an incredible show. So again, please like it, subscribe, follow, share with your friends. Nigeria has I don't know, it's a pocket of so much knowledge and history that So today we did a little bit of Salahuddin, and then next week we'll have another incredible story lined up for you guys. Thank you so much for tuning in, and we will see you again next time on the Sands of Time podcast. Welcome back, everybody. Welcome to the Sands of Time podcast. I am Tariq Ibrahim, and I am with the most incredibly amazing individual here, Mujibuddin.
Peace be upon you, Sam, and everybody.